Tinder is a popular dating app where each user swipes through a sequence of other users in order to find a match. Swiping left means you are not interested. Swiping right means you would like to connect with the person. The simple premise of Tinder has led to massive growth, and the app is now also used to discover new friends and create casual meetings. Every social network knows if you're not growing, then you are dying. Growth is so important to Tinder that they have a large engineering organization devoted to the 5 facets that define their growth: new users, activation, retention, drop-off, and anti-spam. These 5 segments cover the entire Tinder user lifecycle, and there is a sub-team in charge of each of those 5 areas. No matter what kind of Tinder user you are, there are growth engineers focused on your experience, and that includes if you're a bot. Alex Ross is the director of engineering for the growth team at Tinder. His job requires a mix of data science, data engineering, psychology, and setting proper KPIs. A KPI is a key performance indicator. Each sub-team has KPIs that determine how well they are doing with their growth targets. And if the wrong KPI is set, then it can create bad incentives. For example, a growth team that is focused only on getting users to spend more time engaging with Tinder would have an incentive to create so-called dark patterns that trigger addiction. And Tinder's really not interested in that. They're interested in long-term, healthy engagement. If you like this episode, we've done many other shows about data science, about startups, about data engineering. You can download the Software Engineering Daily app for iOS to hear all of our old episodes, and you can discover new topics that might interest you. You can upvote the episodes that you like. You can get recommendations based on your listening history. And if you want to contribute to the Software Engineering Daily app ecosystem, you can go to github.com/softwareengineeringdaily. We've got a number of projects to contribute to. We've got an Android app that we're hoping to get out the door soon. We've got a web front end, and we've got a back-end recommendation system. So whoever you are, there is a project you can contribute to if you are interested in that. But feel free to just consume the content. That's not a problem. And I hope you enjoy this episode. You have a software project that you want to build. Everybody does. I love building products, but I know more about how software fits together than how to actually write the code itself. I don't spend a lot of time writing code, but I do like to build software. That's why I use TopTal. TopTal is the best place to find reasonably priced, extremely talented software engineers to build your projects from scratch. You can get a pair of Apple AirPods when you use toptal.com/sedaily to work with an engineer for at least 20 hours. And I recommend it. I think it's a great way to build your projects if you don't have time to build them yourself. There's a misconception that engineers have to build all of their own projects just because they're capable of doing that. It's not true. TopTal has only the top 3% of developers. They turn away 97% of the developers that apply to work on the TopTal platform, and that's how you get a matching process that's unlike anything else I have seen in the freelancer marketplace. And I've tried a lot of different freelancing platforms. TopTal has such high-quality engineers, and they listen through the design specifications that you have. They handpick the perfect developer for your project, and this has saved me countless hours in my development process. There's really nothing that compares to TopTal that I have seen. So you can get a free pair of Apple AirPods when you try TopTal at toptal.com/sedaily. Find an engineer that's going to help you build your side project and get your MVP off the ground. As long as you do at least 20 hours, you get those free Apple AirPods. And if you've already got a company that you're working on, you can also use TopTal to scale your team and get everything done faster and raise the bar for your engineering, or get through that blocker that's preventing your company from getting to the next level. So check out toptal.com/sedaily and find an engineer who will help your project succeed. Alex Ross is the Director of Engineering for Growth at Tinder. Alex, welcome to Software Engineering Daily.
Thank you, Jeff.
Before we talk about growth engineering itself, let's familiarize any of the listeners who don't know what Tinder is with the product. Describe what Tinder does.
Yeah, definitely. So Tinder is a social discovery platform. It's pretty much the largest in the world. It's an iOS, Android, and recently it's now a web application for your desktop computer. The basic idea is that you create a profile, you go in, and our recommendation system sends you a list of people that we think that based on your demographics, we believe you will like. And this is presented in a card stack, as we call it. It's a bunch of faces, basically. And then you swipe left or right, saying, swipe left means you don't like that person, you don't want to talk to them. Swipe right means you do. And then if that person also swipes right on you, then you get a match. And it's kind of like an exciting, double opt-in moment. And from there, you're able to converse with that person. And the typical intention is to, meet with that person and hopefully make a connection that really changes your life.
We're going to talk about growth engineering today. And certainly one of the metrics that any growth engineer wants to target is revenue or profit. How does
Absolutely.
Tinder make money?
Great question. So Tinder has a premium subscription. Basically, within in-app purchase, you're able to upgrade your Tinder to get Tinder Plus, as we call it. We're also testing a second level of subscription called Tinder Gold. And basically, there's a subset of functionality within the application that gets unlocked if you have either of these subscriptions. And that abilities, include, for example, passporting to a new location. Tinder generally only shows you people within a certain mile radius around you. You configure that radius. But with Passport, you're able to travel to other places in the world. Like let's say you're about to go visit New York and you want to passport there beforehand to set up some dates or some meetups or whatever it is. That's an example of Tinder Plus functionality.
How do you measure growth at Tinder?
Great question. And actually, I should add in, on the revenue point, we're testing and currently have advertising as well. So we're integrated with an ad exchange and we're serving up native advertisements to non-Tinder Plus users. And then can you repeat your last question real quick?
So I was going to ask you how you measure growth, but I'd actually like to interject a little bit of question here because, there's a couple analogies to Tinder's multifaceted business model. And the closest one that I think of is LinkedIn. So when you look into LinkedIn's revenues, they have 3 or 4 substantial revenue streams. They have recruiters, they have subscriptions from premium users, like if you're a job seeker, and they also have advertising. And there are some ways in which a multifaceted revenue stream is helpful. There are other ways in which it can be a distraction. So if you contrast that with Facebook or Google, they have a central revenue stream that is an enormous cash cow. And the disadvantage of that is that's their only leg to stand on. But the advantage of it is that they can focus all of their revenue growth efforts on optimizing that waterfall of a channel. And then they can just do free stuff to essentially drive more people to the top of the funnel or just to be noble benefactors, I think in the case of Google, because their revenue stream makes so much money. And the only reason I bring this topic up is because when you have multiple revenue streams, I imagine it can create a little confusion around which area of the business to try to grow. So, I'm just trying to tee you up for a conversation for, I guess, what are the key metrics that you focus on?
I think that's a great point. So I can tell you my personal belief is that a company should focus on its core value proposition. And ideally, its monetization efforts should stem from that core value proposition. And I do agree that having these multiple channels basically dilutes the amount of mind share that the people who are thinking about growth in revenue or users, it basically dilutes their attention across these multiple streams. So my personal belief is actually that I think that focused single pillar really aligns the entire team around what exactly are we trying to grow. That being said, I think so far, based on my experience at Tinder, it is viable. And the tension point often comes for us around allocation of resources, because we basically, there's a finite amount of time that we can spend building our product. And so do we allocate that to advertising? Do we allocate it to Tinder Plus? And then it's interesting because even within Tinder Plus, this line that Tinder walks is a very fine balance. It's pretty rare, I think, for social applications to charge a subscription of their, regular users. LinkedIn is a great example where they charge subscriptions from salespeople and recruiters, like you said. Tinder, we're basically charging people to help them build meaningful connections with people around them. So even that line of monetizing our user base as opposed to going all in on advertising is a very delicate one for Tinder. And every revenue feature that we've introduced into the application, there's been a huge, conversation around what is the impact of this monetization feature on the ecosystem? Because the percentage of Tinder users that actually pay for Tinder Plus is pretty small. Tinder's user base is so large that it's a very substantial number of users. But we basically need to make sure, we're giving these users certain power user functionalities. And so we really need to think through, what does that do to key metrics like, let's say, swipe right volume, swipe left volume, match rate, conversations? We have a lot of key metrics internally that we basically use to track the user funnel. And so anytime we introduce a feature, particularly revenue, we really have to think through what is the net 6-month result of this?
You did touch on some metrics there. Yep. Maybe you could talk about how you think about growth engineering, because it seems like if you assigned a specific metric to a single engineer and you said, hey, I want you to grow match volume or something like that, right, it could create perverse incentives for that engineer. So, yep. But I can think of other times where maybe you do want to assign a single key metric to an engineer, but maybe you could just describe to me your framework for how you set up the people in your organization, or how you set up yourself for success, for measurable success.
Absolutely. Completely. So at the very top line, we look at monthly active users. And so that's really the primary goal of the growth team, is growing our monthly active user base. Tinder happens to have a weekly usage cycle. People will, log on Thursday trying to set up dates for Friday or Saturday. They'll also log in on Sunday at the end of the weekend to kind of meet new people because they're coming off of a social, mood. So basically we look primarily at MAU, monthly active users, and WOW, weekly active users. The third is daily active users, but we don't think that's as good of an indication of, the long-term health of the company. We do also look at revenue. We actually have a separate team dedicated entirely to revenue features because that is such a substantial amount of functionality within the application. So my team, which is about 30 engineers, it's gone through a huge amount of growth in the last year. It was, 3 engineers in 2016. Now it's 30 and growing. My team is oriented around KPIs, like you said. So the framework that we're building towards is basically having a feature team, which is a cross-functional team of engineers, iOS, Android, backend, and designer and product manager, having basically 4 teams, each dedicated to one of the key levers of growing our monthly active user base. And those 4 key levers match what we've identified is the primary user lifecycle within Tinder. And so that is, at the very top, user acquisition. So this basically means, how do we increase our downloads and registrations? That feeds the funnel. The next stage of the user lifecycle is activation. So great, someone downloaded the app and they registered. Now, how do we retain this user and turn them into a monthly active user? It turns out that within Tinder, having a conversation is a huge indicator as to whether or not a user will retain. Because if you have a conversation with a new person on Tinder, that's really the magic moment of Tinder. You very likely just met someone who changed your life either in a small way or in an extremely meaningful way. The third part of our growth framework is re-engagement. So that basically means within our user base, we have millions of users that have signed up. Some of those users naturally stop using the platform. So basically they've become dormant. And so we use push notifications primarily for re-engaging those users and turning them back into active users. And then the last part of that is retention. And so this basically means preventing users from churning, either through becoming dormant, which means they still have the app, but they've just stopped using it, or deleting their account. So there's, a large number of people who delete their account every day. And we have people on our team who focus entirely on understanding, why is it you're deleting your account? We ask them, and there's reasons ranging from I met somebody, which is a completely valid response. You're using Tinder to meet someone, you end up in a relationship, totally natural. You're going to stop using Tinder. We actually embrace that because we believe that those people turn into word of mouth referrals. But there are other reasons. There's bugs. Maybe you're not getting recommendations that you like. Maybe you're not matching with your recommendations. Maybe you're not having enough conversations. There's quite a few reasons why you might stop using Tinder. So that's the overall framework. Yeah.
Right. So you described the 4 areas that your 30 engineer growth engineering team are focused on. You've got
Correct.
top of the funnel, people just coming into Tinder. You've got activation, which is maybe people who came in, they had a lukewarm response, but they've still got the app. You want to you want to activate them. You want to get them engaged somehow. You've got re-engagement, which I guess is people who have downloaded the app, they've used it a little bit, and then they dropped off, and you want to re-engage them somehow. And then, are those people who have actually uninstalled the app, or they've disengaged?
They are users who have disengaged and were previously active.
Okay,
got it. It's a common pattern within Tinder that, it takes a lot of work to swipe and match and converse. And so eventually after a month, you might stop doing so.
Right. And so the fourth one is actually preventing churn, preventing people from actually uninstalling and completely disengaging. Did I capture those 4 areas correctly?
You did. And there's actually a 5th that I can touch upon. That
go ahead.
Very, very unique to Tinder, a little bit because of just the way things have shaped up, but I actually love this. So our team also does anti-spam. So we have 6 engineers dedicated entirely to preventing spam on the system. And the reason why I think this is interesting and actually natural within a growth team is that it really aligns the incentive of the growth team to not only bring in new users, but to bring in legitimate, good users for the ecosystem. So that team is called Protect and Care, and they basically protect against both spam, which is a pretty large problem for all internet scale companies, and bad behavior.
Have you guys talked to Smite?
Smite? No, I don't think so.
Yeah, it's a company that works against bad actors. It's a friend of mine runs it, Pete Hunt. It's a great company. I recommend checking it out. They're just really good at preventing bad actors. But we can talk about that offline. That spam stuff is a huge problem. I've talked to Pete about that because there are social networks where, and actually specifically the dating scam problem where you get matched with somebody and they're so attractive and they like manga just like you like manga, and you guys both like boba tea, and they want to go on a date with you, but they just need $300 to make it across town because they have a train that they ride that happens to take $300, and it's only, they only accept Bitcoin on this train. So this is actually like a significant problem on platforms like Tinder.
It's huge. It is genuinely huge. And that's what you just described is manual. That's somebody on the other end attempting to defraud somebody out of their money. Tinder, because it's such a large and widely used platform, also has a significant amount of automated spam. And so those are programs that are written basically to, like you said, create a beautiful account. It's predominantly female accounts trying to match with men. The men match with them, and pretty quickly this bot has a conversation with the user and will send a link. It always boils down to a link because they're trying to get the user off of Tinder, enter a credit card, and they make money off of referral bonuses to adult websites. They make money off of pure credit card fraud, capturing credit cards. It's a substantial problem for, I think, all social networks. And so we have a team formed entirely around just, handling that.
Now, the question I wanted to ask you is, what are the tensions between those 5 different metrics? What are the knobs that when you tune them to increase or to decrease churn, for example, does that sometimes have a tension with re-engagement, for example?
Yeah, the primary tension that comes to mind is almost a really abstract one, which is that a growth team's job is to basically increase the addictiveness of the application, right? And so we have to walk a fine line around introducing new features that might not be on the surface great for the user experience, But basically, the model that I ascribe to is that a growth team's job is to basically get the user to the core value of the application sooner and more frequently. And so that's kind of like a main tension we walk is, these things we're doing, we have to really ask ourselves, is this what we want as a user? Like everyone talks about how addictive social networks are now. That's because Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, all these other applications, Snapchat, they have growth teams that are like literally working to make the application more addictive. As far as between the individual knobs, I wouldn't say there's inherent tension between these key metrics that we're trying to drive themselves. The tension we run into is almost what you referred to in the beginning, which is having engineers dedicated entirely to these sole KPIs is great for focus. It basically means you have a brilliant person working over the course of a year to move this extremely important lever, right? The thing is that, this framework is pretty good, but there is overlap between these. And so what we need to do is make sure that we have a team that even though these sub-teams are focused on core metrics, the overall growth team needs to be aligned and there needs to be a really good rapport between each of these individual teams because, one team might have an idea that, kind of spreads into like the next KPI and you have to make sure that the people on the team are aligned as a team and, they work together well.
Look for a job more efficiently with Indeed Prime. Indeed Prime flips the job search model and lets you find a job more efficiently even while you're busy with other engineering work or coding your side project. You simply upload your resume and in one click you get immediate exposure to companies like Facebook, Uber, and Dropbox. The employers that are interested will reach out to you within 1 week with salary, position, and equity up front. Don't let applying for jobs become a full-time job itself. With Indeed Prime, the jobs come to you. The average software developer gets 5 employer contacts and an average salary offer of $125,000 through Indeed Prime. It's 100% free for candidates. There are no strings attached. Sign up now at Indeed.com/SEDaily. Thank you to Indeed Prime for being a repeat sponsor of Software Engineering Daily. And if you want to support the show while looking for a new job, go to Indeed.com/SEDaily. Let's go back to that point you made about the addictive nature. Some people call these dark patterns.
Yep.
You've got. Are you familiar with Tristan Harris?
No, I don't think so.
Is this guy who's been talking a lot about this addiction issue? He was a Google product manager. He started a nonprofit called Time Well Spent. I think he has a TED Talk. He was on Sam Harris's podcast talking about technology addiction. And there's a lot he says that I don't really agree with, but he does paint a detailed picture about how the addictive nature of these products develops, how they become more addictive over time, sometimes because of the unfortunate incentives that exist within a growth team at a company like Facebook or Snapchat or potentially Tinder. But tell me how you think about those, because you can. I think the thing about dark patterns. Let's say a dark pattern makes you more addicted to Tinder, and so you're using Tinder more, and then you find the love of your life. In that sense, the dark pattern was beneficial for you.
Exactly.
Other times, the dark pattern gets you engaged with Tinder. You're swiping right. It's 4 a.m. You realize you've been swiping right for 6 hours.
Yep.
You had no meaningful matches. That seems like
not great.
It's not great. Yeah. So
totally.
Yeah.
So,
how do you think about that?
I'm pretty happy working for Tinder because I personally have experienced like the magic of meeting people who change your life. There's more than if you go to TED and you look up talks on the meaning of happiness, I'd say like 90% of them are about interpersonal connections and meeting people. So I'm thankful to have to work on this problem at Tinder, where I do believe that we are actually doing a good thing, basically introducing people to more people. They might change your political beliefs. You might be exposed to people you didn't expect. I would say that hopefully it reduces things like racism and other discrimination because you're exposed to, again, more people. You might meet the love of your life. I've personally met professional contacts. I've met people that I play tennis with. Basically, my belief is that, again, growth boils down to introducing users to the core value of the product sooner and frequently. And so the question is, what is the core value of that product? For Facebook, I don't get as good of a feeling. I generally don't feel great after browsing my newsfeed for 20 minutes. But at the same time, like I love being connected with people that I've met throughout my life. I eventually, met someone on Tinder, connected them on Facebook, and they turn into a lasting connection. So yeah, I tend to think, hopefully the base use of most of these applications is good. I also think that there is, in the long term, I do believe that it's up to people to basically, form enough mental discipline to be able to disconnect from these applications. If you're not able to control your own, social media addiction, then that's something that I think people should work on. And ideally, that's something that we also call out more within society as something that needs to be worked on.
That's how I feel. That's exactly how I feel. And that's actually the exact issue that I take with Tristan's perspective. Although I am probably not casting him entirely correctly. I think it's one of the things he talks about, I think, is age limitations. Like maybe, if you're under 18, an app can't exploit you through certain growth tactics. But anyway, I need to get him on the show. So we've talked about, at this point, what a growth team does, how you think about KPIs, how you think about your framework. Let's get into the actual engineering side of things and the data side of things. So from your management point of view, what are you doing on a day-to-day basis, and what are your engineers doing?
Great question. So my team, as far as composition goes, is, like I mentioned, cross-functional. I think that's extremely important because it enables the growth team to take an idea from inception all the way through shipping. We even have data scientists on our team who are like Caltech machine learning people who basically act as advisors for all of our feature teams for how do we identify big wins and how do we apply advanced strategies like machine learning to these growth problems. And then let's see, from the management perspective. So my job is really to identify the big wins. And I would say for anybody leading a growth team, growth engineering, whatever it is, you need a different character than, let's say, a back-end platform team. So my background is in entrepreneurship. I've led marketing teams, I've led sales teams, I've led engineering teams. And, because of that experience, I'm able to basically prioritize more effectively, I think. And so my job is very much identifying what should the growth team be working on? How do we have big wins? How do we cut through all of the noise? It's really easy for companies and teams to, have activity, but not necessarily actually build things that really matter. So it's my job to identify those things. And then I have really good leaders on the team who are, at Tinder, engineering managers are typically also project managers. And so they're the ones that, we get an idea, we think through it, and then between the product manager and the engineering manager, we basically do what it takes to get it out. Specs, building, QA, things like that, measuring after the fact.
Can you take me through the life cycle of a growth engineering initiative you worked on recently? Is there a specific initiative, like even if it's the color of a button that you changed, or the change in a screen?
Yeah, definitely. I have a good example. So right now, we are testing adding a deactivate feature to the application. So basically, rather than deleting your account, you may want to deactivate it. Let's say, you have finals coming up, and so you kind of want to cut off your Tinder usage, and so you'll deactivate your account, but you might not want to actually delete it because then you lose all of your matches, all of your swipe history, your profile, etc. This is common for most other social applications like Facebook. This was like a 2-month nice little growth project where basically myself and a director of product had identified this as a potentially high impact, good growth feature. And I think it's, very representative of growth features in that it's not particularly sexy. It's not like a beautiful UI, but it is a key lever within the application. And so from there, we then have a meeting between the engineering manager on the project, and then the designer and the product manager. And we'll usually invite the whole engineering team. Each of our engineering teams are like 5 engineers. And again, a part of growth, I think, is having the engineers deeply involved with product from the very beginning of the project. So oftentimes they're even involved in like brainstorming and saying, hey, what should we build next? It's a very collaborative effort between product and engineering. From there, once we have like a good spec, we use Confluence, so we'll document like this is what the feature is supposed to do. Usually the product manager drives that effort and then the engineering manager is refining it. Once we have the spec, we'll then give estimates, the engineering manager will, on how long we expect this to take. And then pretty quickly we move into development. We usually try to build the backend before the clients so that we have stub APIs up that the clients can consume. Usually makes development just a little bit faster. Once we're done, kind of unique to Tinder and some other companies, is that we don't have a dedicated QA team. And I personally love this from like an engineering management perspective. Our growth team is very much empowered and kind of accountable for their own quality. So we often do testathons where we'll get the product manager, the designer, the engineering team all in a room together for 2 hours, and we'll run through the acceptance criteria, all testing the application. I love this because it really puts the responsibility for quality into the hands of the engineers. And then also testing side by side with the product manager kind of like bonds the team together. And then having backend engineers test the Android application really gives them like a full view of like the entire system, right? And then we will ship the feature eventually, usually behind some feature gate. We'll, ship it to like a 5% variant of our user base. We'll have like a control group. And then a few weeks after shipping, we work with our data analyst team. So Tinder has like a 10-person data analyst team, statisticians, statisticians. And they basically work with us to identify what exactly was the impact of this test. Most things are phrased as tests. And should we roll it out to the entire user base?
The deactivate button, which of the 4 KPIs or I guess high-level growth segments among reactivation and tension, or I can't remember all 4 of them. Of the 4 teams, which one did it impact the most?
That was driven by the retention team. And so the idea is, we have a certain number of users deleting their accounts every day. And we see that a significant number of those users are recreating their accounts shortly after. That's kind of the opportunity. And so let's introduce this ability to deactivate your account, maybe remove the ability to delete your account from the application and put it in the web. And then that should increase the retention of our users.
Okay. Makes sense. So do you need to A/B test this in order to get a valid test?
Yeah, we do. Definitely. Because we need to, we A/B test pretty much everything. This test in particular has 4 variants. Basically testing different combinations of there's deactivate and delete, there's nothing. And we basically need to observe what is the impact of each of these potential paths forward on the user experience. This is a great example of something where we believe that this is actually good for the users. We believe that retaining your profile on Tinder is a good thing, but we want to make sure that there's no, qualitative pushback from the user base. We want to make sure there's no quantitative impact on the metrics that we track for the user lifecycle.
So how do you facilitate that A/B test? Because I know mobile deployments can make A/B testing kind of tricky because mobile deployments, you deploy a binary, just a huge binary that you upload to the iTunes App Store or the Google Play Store. Doesn't make it easy to A/B test.
Yeah. So we use LeanPlum, which is one of the, 3 good softwares for, in my opinion, client-side A/B testing. And we'll set up the experiments in that software. It's basically it's a SaaS software where you can set up experiments. You can also send push notifications and A/B test push notifications through it. And basically, each time the client opens, we've written code to sync the user's profile with the test groups that they should be in. And then the application is programmed in such a way that it responds. So basically, we have a lot of feature gates throughout our entire application that turn on and off certain features for different users based on their LeanPlum settings.
Okay, that makes sense. I imagine you could also use React Native for this. Do you use React Native in your mobile apps?
No, we don't. We use Swift on iOS and we use Kotlin on Android, which is kind of like a new exciting language in the Android ecosystem. I think React Native may make it a little bit easier, but at the end of the day, you're still going to need feature gates. You're still going to have some code that's triggered based on these flags. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. How can you talk more about your continuous integration system? Because I think that overlaps with your feature gating system.
Yeah, definitely. So, Tinder's gone through like a really exciting kind of transformation in the last year or so. We have new engineering leadership. Our engineering team has like tripled in size, and we've really focused on continuous integration as a part of like scaling up our engineering team. So each platform has its own CI. On the client applications, we use So we use Jenkins on iOS, and then we use, I'm forgetting the word. God, there's like a cloud SaaS platform that we use on Android. It's a very, very widely used one. But basically, each of these like build pipelines build the binary and then run through a set of integration tests, basically. And then on PR, we also use both those softwares to run unit tests. I'd say 75 or maybe even like 80 or 90% of our tests are unit tests on the clients. We have relatively few integration, or there's different words for it, but like UI tests, end-to-end tests, basically tests that are written to say, user does this functionality, they press this button, does this button show up in the right place type of thing. Most of our tests are unit tests testing like pure logic within the applications. This is pretty hard stuff though, I have to say. Like we've been a lot of smart people working on what is the most efficient way to test our mobile applications. There's a lot of different like trains of thoughts, but I typically would recommend starting with unit tests across all platforms.
Well, the UI tests are so much harder to do, where you have to do something. Like I've seen these platforms for UI testing, and they're pretty cool. I want to do a show on one of them, but pretty hard. Like you're taking a screen grab, and then you're validating that things are in the right place. That's a lot harder than validating that you swipe right on something and a database entry changes to the right thing.
Right. Yeah, I think the two primary problems with these UI tests are they're slow, much slower to run, because you need to spin up an emulator of the application, and then they're also brittle. So if it's pretty easy to break them if like you change your UI a little bit, maybe you have an A/B test running, whatever it is.
Right, and then the integration test doesn't pass, and then you go and inspect it, and maybe you try to recreate it manually, and you say, wow, well, this works from my point of view, and then you run it back through continuous integration, and it fails again because the UI test is brittle, like you said, and then you're like, I don't even know what to do. Should I just take out the UI tests altogether? So that makes sense. So I guess, unit test coverage, not so hard to do, especially in an app like Tinder. It's not too much. I imagine there's not too much crazy unanticipated functionality going on.
You would be amazed.
Okay, all right, tell me about it.
Yeah, definitely. So when you get into like all of the different cross sections of the app, I think complexity comes from having like layers of functionality. So basically when you get into the application, the actual code powering our card stack, our messaging application, our profile editing, things like that, all the settings. Layered on top of that is all of our Tinder Plus functionality. So you basically have this like gate saying some users can do these things, other users can do these things, and you end up with like almost like combinatorial like permutations as to like what these users can do. So one of the things, Tinder's not like the largest application in the world, but it's definitely a surprise for most people coming in that, oh wow, this is actually like a pretty large, complicated application. And then our back end, I just wanted to touch upon, that's a little bit smoother and full formed, where we basically have unit tests. All three platforms have acceptance criteria for unit test coverage. So on the back end, for example, you can't check in code unless the unit test coverage percentage has gone up, which means that we are continually raising the bar. Yeah. And that's because, we started at a pretty low percentage. And so we had to figure out how do we over time get the team closer to like a healthy 80% coverage mark. And so basically the idea is every single code check-in has to raise the bar.
And you strictly enforce that?
Strictly enforce it. Yeah. Extremely few exceptions. Yeah. Which means that if you introduce a bunch of code without unit tests, or if you remove a bunch of code that had unit tests, you need to write some.
Well, that's a great policy. I think that's a perfect policy for a product like Tinder, where the core offering of Tinder is so useful and so valuable that you're just going to continue to grow, and you want to keep it stable. You want to keep things going well. You're not in a situation where you need to throw a bunch of stuff at the wall and see what sticks. You're in a position where you need to batten down the hatches. You need to make sure performance is good and improving. And one way to do that is to be strict about people increasing their unit test coverage and not accepting pull requests if the unit test coverage has not improved.
Totally. Yeah. Quality has pretty much been a mantra for the last year or so because Tinder, like you said, it's scaled. I'll say a huge focus right now from growth and just general engineering is international. I think it's actually one of the biggest competitive advantages Tinder has is that we have a substantial adoption rate internationally, which is kind of unique for a lot of like tech companies. And we didn't really focus on it. It just kind of organically happened. But the reason why it's so competitively great for Tinder is that a lot of people use it when they're traveling because that's the time when you really want to be meeting new people, right? So it's a single application where you can basically say, I am going to Argentina, I'm going to Russia, I'm going to Japan. We have user bases in all of those countries. And so when you go, you're able to passport beforehand or you land in Japan and then you start swiping and you're able to actually meet people to, stay with or to just meet up for dinner or drinks or to give you a tour around the area. I recently did this. I went from LA to New York and I had, dates and like hangouts set up for all 4 days that I was there within 3 hours. And so it's pretty amazing. But from the engineering perspective, that is a huge challenge because Tinder as such a, it's been around for 4 years, maybe almost 5 at this point. That's an extremely early stage. The company's like 230 people. It's very difficult for an engineering team to scale to millions of users internationally and to maintain its performance in countries like India, Japan, Russia, etc. So it's a huge challenge. And the way we get through that, we focus on quality. I mean, like internally, like the company, all engineers focused on quality.
Amazon Redshift powers the analytics of your business, and Intermix.io powers the analytics of your Redshift. Your dashboards are loading slowly. Your queries are getting stuck. Your business intelligence tools are choking on data. The problem could be with how you are managing your Redshift cluster. Intermix.io gives you the tools that you need to analyze your Amazon Redshift performance and improve the tool chain of everyone downstream from your data warehouse. The team at Intermix has seen so many Redshift clusters, they are confident that they can solve whatever performance issues you are having. Go to intermix.io/sedaily to get a 30-day free trial of Intermix. Intermix.io gives you performance analytics for Amazon Redshift. Intermix collects all your Redshift logs and makes it easy to figure out what's wrong so that you can take action, all in a nice, intuitive dashboard. The alternative is doing that yourself, running a bunch of scripts to get your diagnostic data and then figuring out how to visualize and manage it. What a nightmare and a waste of time. Intermix is used by Postmates, Typeform, Udemy, and other data teams who need insights into their Redshift cluster. Go to intermix.io/sedaily to try out your free 30-day trial of Intermix and get your Redshift cluster under better analytics. Thanks to Intermix for being a new sponsor of Software Engineering Daily. Well, it's so interesting to hear that the markets are not balkanized. You don't have the Tinder. Well, I mean, I'm sure you do have the Tinder for India in India, but you're describing a reason why the Tinder for India is Tinder. And, we're seeing the same questions arise in the ride-sharing market. Is there an Uber for China? Yes, there is. Is there an Uber for India? Yes, there is, because there's the question of, is there really an advantage to having a global Uber? Maybe, maybe not, but you certainly just described a network effect that makes complete sense for me. I want to get into data because data is going to drive how you measure the outcomes of these changes that you're going to make to the Tinder application. And it's also going to drive insights to deciding what features to build. How does data science and data engineering fit in with growth?
Great question. So at Tinder, we have 3 data-oriented teams. We have a data analytics team, basically business analysts who are, running SQL queries, creating dashboards, things like that. We have a data engineering team, which is a team of about, I think, 8 or 10 engineers. And in the last year, they completely rebuilt our data pipeline. You can imagine as you're using Tinder, the app is sending off billions of events, telemetry basically, on how people are using the application. So that is the backbone of how we analyze whether or not a feature is successful. And the pipeline for processing all of those events and making them available for features, making them available for analysis, that's some heavy duty engineering. And then we have a data science team, which is our highest concentration of PhDs in the company. And these are the guys and gals that are working on our recommendation algorithm. And they're basically working on applying AI, NLP, language processing, machine learning, et cetera, to various features within Tinder. So when we're measuring, we're primarily working with the data analyst team to draw insights out of the data that our data engineering team has, facilitated getting plopped into our backend systems.
I would love to, if we had time, to dive into data engineering, but I don't think we have time. So I want to assume that the data engineering pipeline works. It gets me the data I need if I can ask the right questions.
Yep. Keynote, yeah.
So why don't you talk about give a little bit more color into like the interaction between the growth team and the data science team. For example, if I'm on the growth team and I want to surface insights about the user behavior that is going on in Tinder, do I need to know what question to ask, or is there some set of dashboards? Is there some set of visualizations that I can just go and I can look at, and that's going to give me ideas for what growth metrics to tune?
That is a great question. And I expect this might be the largest or one of the top 3 challenges for any growth team in any company. And I don't think you can ever completely solve it. So within Tinder, we have a set of dashboards. We use Periscope for basically turning SQL queries into pretty dashboards. And right now, we are going through an effort to standardize the set of dashboards that we look at as the source of truth for the key stages in the user lifecycle. Currently, I think my team has maybe 40 or 50 different pages of dashboards filled with graphs, ranging from engineering-oriented ones to make sure that, let's say our authentication system is working correctly, all the way to, more business-oriented ones, which are measuring the conversion rate of a user who swipes, a user who has a conversation, et cetera. And so it's a challenge because if you don't have a source of truth of your metrics, then it's very difficult to create alignment between the various teams. And I would say asking the right question is the hardest part of data analysis, I think. We do have a data analyst team where basically, when we want to figure something out, we'll submit a Jira query. We use Jira, the ticket tracking system, and basically we're able to create a ticket that has a template and basically say, first question is what are you trying to figure out? And then the second question is, what business impact does that have? And it's very high level questions that the data analyst teams want us to fill out. And then from there, a data analyst will be assigned to that question and they will figure out the best way to actually figure it out. In my experience, though, I urge all of the engineers on my team, the product managers that we work with, et cetera, to basically, you have to figure out how to ask the question that you want to ask. And that's kind of the whole thing of a growth team, is that it has to be pretty cross-functional, which means that the engineers that thrive are the ones who understand how the application works, what the key business levers are, et cetera, because they need to bring that to bear on having impact, basically.
Well, so you mentioned Periscope Data there,
Yep.
and Periscope is one of these tools that is in the Looker, Tableau
Yep.
family of business intelligence dashboarding tools. I think that this brand of dashboarding tools came out of the really painful period that we had in software engineering, where if you are a product manager and you wanted to get a quote big data query from the quote big data team or the data warehousing team, you had to go and ask the data warehousing person to run your Hadoop query, and that would take a long time, and it was really painful. So you would have these people working the Hadoop clusters, and they've always got like a long backlog of requests. And so there was this family of companies that developed around trying to make that a little bit easier. And I think Periscope Data, what people talk about, I'm actually doing an interview with them a little bit later this week, but what people talk about with them is it's just the query language is really good. So it's almost so good that if you had a growth engineer or a product manager, even if they're not great at SQL, they can just kind of cobble together their own queries and they can get the information that they want. It sounds like it's not that turnkey because you at Tinder at least, because you still have to maybe sometimes you have to file a Jira ticket to have a data analyst make that query for you. Although on the bright side, once you have that query written, it just stands there and constantly updates the dashboard, and you don't have to write the same query twice, and then you've got this library of 50 dashboards that you can look through over time. Do you see that changing? Do you see it getting to a place where everybody who is even remotely technical in the organization can ask their own questions without having to file a ticket?
I hope so. So the two primary blockers to that are, first of all, data access. So Tinder is owned by a publicly traded company, which means that we do have metrics that are considered basically insider knowledge, right? And so there's a lot of questions internally, because Tinder is such a young company, around what is our policy? Are we full transparency? Is that possible? Is it possible to give all engineers that need access to these metrics access? Currently, we do have rules in place where, certain very sensitive metrics are only available to certain people. The second part is performance. So, we put all of our data in Redshift, and if you have 1,000 dashboards hammering these key tables, depending on your schema, it might get pretty slow. And we see this at peak times during the day when we have all these dashboards loading. They take quite a while to load. And so those 2 points are, a point towards having a centralized data analyst team. I personally really do hope, and I believe in distributing that, decentralizing. I believe that basically engineers should not only be empowered to figure out what the key levers are, they should almost be held accountable for it. Because I think that's a great thing in an engineer's career. Whether or not an engineer realizes it, they are choosing what they work on. And there's a huge difference if you choose projects that are impactful versus if you're continually working on projects that kind of, don't really succeed particularly well. You will see a difference in your career trajectory. So I choose to address that up front, and I urge all of my engineers to kind of extend beyond just engineering and to figure out where the impact is.
Are there any other lessons in psychology and sociology that you've learned from working within Tinder?
Let's see. My general advice to people on Tinder, and I think this applies to life, is, and I've really seen this by observing what happens on Tinder, is that it takes a lot of swipes, it takes a lot of matches, and it takes a lot of conversations to meet someone meaningful. And I see a lot of people take that personally. And I think that's kind of a life lesson, right? Where basically people feel like, this girl, those girls, this guy, that guy isn't responding to me. And that's a reflection on me. Whereas having seen the data, it is absolutely not a reflection on you as a person. There is no fundamental truth around attractiveness or anything like that. It's just that certain people jive well, they have a connection, they have chemistry, and certain people don't. And so it's a huge challenge for Tinder. There are commonalities. People they're attracted to certain things that are represented that we're able to analyze with computer vision, for example. But I think people should approach applications like Tinder and honestly meeting people in general with a certain dose of it's a numbers game a lot of the time. Just meet enough people and kind of have confidence that you are worthy as an individual and everything will work out. And you have to put yourself out there enough.
What kind of computer vision stuff are you talking about there?
Yeah, definitely. So, Tinder is a very visual application. Basically, you're presented with a stack of people who have chosen their photos. And you can imagine that we're working on things that are pretty interesting around identifying, some people really like outdoorsy people. Some people really like people with pets. Some people like tall, dark, and handsome. Some people like blondes, etc. People like people in suits, things like that. And so it's pretty interesting drawing out like for certain people that you're able to kind of identify what type of people they would like to see based on their previous swipe patterns. So there's a lot of work being done. Like I mentioned within Tinder, we now have a data science team. And so we're looking at incorporating that analysis, that computer vision, that basically you categorize an image as to like, you can boil down an image to like the specific categories that it fits into, and then you can feed that into the person's recommendation system.
These recommendation systems, they still have such a long way to go. Like it's like I use Spotify and I'm still just like, you guys are just not getting it right. Like you still can't give me
totally
the magical experience of just pressing play and hearing exactly what I want to hear right now, which is like such an entitled thing to say, but
it's fair though.
Oh, what'd you say?
It is fair because I think it is possible. It just takes,
exactly.
These recommendation systems haven't been in development for all that long. And I think the industry overall is moving, if you're not in the industry year by year, you're out of date within a year, 18 months.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I know the same is true with YouTube and I imagine Google search even like it feels pretty magical, but I'm sure in another 10 years it'll be even more magical. And that's in some sense a recommendation system at this point since it's so tailored to your personal preferences. So wrapping up, let's just talk a little bit about broader engineering topics. So you were just an engineering manager. Why did you switch to focus on growth?
Yeah, definitely. I actually joined Tinder as a senior backend engineer. So I joined kind of intentionally as like a individual contributor. I recommend this for most managers joining companies, even if it's not official, to join as an engineer, be in the trenches, so to speak. Because I think if you join as an engineering leader and you haven't actually done the work at a company, each environment has different challenges for the engineers. And there's some similarities across companies, but you really need to understand what are the blockers that your engineers are going to face. So yeah, senior backend engineer. And then I became an engineering manager. And that was basically, I was the engineering manager building Tinder's authentication, user creation, and onboarding systems. Over time, because I come from an entrepreneurial background, I wanted to expand my scope to include more of like, Tinder's a great company, huge opportunity. It has scale. Let's do things that matter. So I basically championed to create this growth engineering team. And then it was built around like that idea.
And final question, I'm just curious about the difference between building a software company in LA and building one in San Francisco. Have you talked to many people about the differences there? I think I was looking at your profile. I don't think you've ever lived in San Francisco, but you've lived in a lot of different places. And I'm sure you have a perspective. I'm sure you've spent time in San Francisco, so you probably have some perspective for how software goes here. What's it like building a software company in LA? What's unique about it?
Yeah, definitely. I have lived in San Jose, Redwood City, Bernal Heights.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah, so I pretty well
my
exposed
mistake.
No, totally fine. And then Tinder actually, to get to the point, Tinder opened a Palo Alto office because we did need to scale our engineering team with such high caliber so quickly that really, it was basically necessary to open a satellite office up there, in my opinion. And it's worked great. It does present challenges because you need to, collaborate between offices, which is hard for a small team, but it's going pretty well. LA at this point, having been in this industry for a while, has changed dramatically in the last 5 or 6 years. I'd say because there are companies in Los Angeles like Snapchat, for example, there's a lot more talent being imported into the city. And I would expect pretty substantial reverberations from that in the next 3 to 4 years as, people will naturally leave companies like Snapchat, Tinder, Rubicon Project, Hulu is down here. Riot Games is a huge software, high caliber software engineer employer down here. All these companies have really scaled in the last 2 to 4 years. So it's going through a pretty dramatic change that I think is, probably relatively reflected in New York City as well, Seattle.
Yeah, I'm from Austin. I'm still waiting for that to happen in Austin. There hasn't really been a giant, there was HomeAway, but there hasn't really been a giant exit in software companies in Austin. I'm really waiting for it because that's going to be the start of an ecosystem. But until then, that's why I'm not living in Austin and not trying to build a company there. Anyway, Alex, I know we're up against time. Thank you for coming on the show. This has been a really interesting conversation. Tinder's a great product. I've used it before. I was one of the people that churned out, but great product. There's a chance, you'll get me back, I'm sure. Maybe I'll use it to find a co-founder or something.
Oh, totally viable.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks for coming on the show.
Cool. Thank you, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
Grammatech Code Sonar helps development teams improve code quality with static analysis. It helps flag issues early in the development process, allowing developers to release better code faster. Code Sonar can easily be integrated into any development process. Code Sonar performs advanced static analysis of C, C++, Java, and even raw binary code. Code Sonar performs unique data flow and symbolic execution analysis to aggressively scan for problems in your code. Just like battleships use sonar to detect objects deep underwater, engineers use Code Sonar to detect subtle problems deep within their code. Go to go.grammatech.com/sedaily to get your free 30-day trial exclusively for Software Engineering Daily listeners. Code Sonar analyzes your code, and it delivers a detailed report. The Code Sonar user interface provides all the information that you need to quickly understand the reports, follow cross-functional paths, understand cross-references, quickly navigate between files, and visualize large pieces of your code. Go to go.grammatech.com/sedaily to get your 30-day free trial and unleash the power of advanced static analysis. Thanks to Grammatech for being a sponsor of Software Engineering Daily.
Wow.